It's one of the world's most beautiful cities, Jerusalem, but few are so divided, so troubled. Its people are key to its future, of course, but its population's changing. So what does that mean for the future of the city? I'm Sami Zaidan, and this is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to a special edition of Inside Story from Jerusalem, holy, revered, but beleaguered. Well, since the foundation of the Israeli state, and especially since the 1967 war, it's seen many changes which reverberate daily around the world. But it's the shifting population within the city itself that's now a key factor in the political landscape and the path to either peace or more conflict. Well, in a moment we'll be talking to our three guests, but first we ask how are families being affected by the changes taking place. We visited those living in Jerusalem to find out. Her family have lived in Jerusalem's old city for generations. But Palestinian mother of five, Maha Dadour, can't share her home there with her husband. He hails from the West Bank, beyond the city's boundaries, and Israeli authorities won't grant him a permit to live there.
We go once a week to Bethlehem. However, the way back is very tough, especially for my little son, who is very close to his father and refuses to come back and cries along the way. The situation is very hard for him and me, but we need to be patient and maybe one day we can have entry passes.
For more than a decade, Maha's husband of 17 years hasn't even been allowed to visit. Instead, his family spent up to 3 hours negotiating a checkpoint on the short journey to visit him once a week.
I feel depressed. I live alone without my family. I'm not sleeping nor eating properly. I'm forcibly living away from my family. I do not choose that, and if I try to go there, I will be jailed.
Palestinians say wholesale discrimination is aimed at driving them from Jerusalem. Residency issues, permits to build homes, and social deprivation among the obstacles they face. Nevertheless, Arab births continue to outpace Jewish ones. Some recent statistics suggest Arabs could outnumber Jews in Jerusalem within 25 years. That's interpreted by some Israelis as a direct threat to their control of the city and hence to their state. Only last month, Prime Minister Ehud Olmert announced a $1.5 million package aimed at strengthening Jewish facets of the city. Economic considerations are, of course, a major factor that is convincing many Jewish families to rethink their presence in the city, but there are other factors too. You see, 4 years ago, an Orthodox Jew became mayor of Jerusalem, and many secular Jewish families began to feel a swing towards religious conservatism, a swing they say that has added another dimension of polarization to this city. Jewish Jerusalemite Yaron Sadan, who owns one of Israel's biggest publishing houses, says he and his family are among many considering leaving.
The social pattern of Jerusalem has changed a lot in the recent years. When I came here 32 years ago, it was a very vivid, young city. In the recent years, it has turned into a damn serious city. No business opportunities. It has become a very orthodox society.
They've always had a role in the political and emotional battle for Jerusalem, but demographics now play a bigger part than ever before. Well, let's take a look now at how the shape of Jerusalem has been changing. This is how the old city looked after the first Arab-Israeli War of 1948. In 1967, Israel annexed a further 64 square kilometers of the West Bank, which became part of its new and allegedly unified Jerusalem. Well, Israel immediately started building new Jewish settlements in the area, despite the fact that they're illegal under international law. Now, 40 years after the 1967 war, Israel's proposed barrier to separate it from the West Bank is well under construction. This encompasses those illegal settlements to the east and shifts the boundaries yet again. So what does all this mean? Well, joining me now to discuss at least some of the many complex issues here are our guests. Avi Melamed, he's a former advisor to Jerusalem mayors, including the current Prime Minister, Ehud Olmert. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Also joining us, Jad Ishaq. He's Director General of the Jerusalem Institute for Applied Research. Thanks for joining us today. And David Shearer, Head of the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. Well, David, if I could start with you. The city has changed a lot in the last 40 years, but are we any closer to peace?
I think really in the last 40 years we're probably further away from it than we ever have been. The realities for the two...
Why are we so far
Well,
away?
I think that the realities for the two communities have divided much more than they had been before. For Israelis living in Jerusalem, access is obviously unimpeded. They can get pretty much around all of Jerusalem. They can go from suburbs, there's roads, new tunnels, new construction underway, and obviously in the settlements as well. For the Palestinians, it's quite a different story. Right now they are constrained. If you're living out on the West Bank, for example, coming into Jerusalem, you need a permit. You have to come through the barrier or the wall as you described it. And the wall is there obviously for security purposes, to stop suicide bombers coming into Israel. But it's also has taken huge amounts of land inside the West Bank and stopped those Palestinians from being in the West Bank, being able to come into the city that they've always come to know as their own.
All right, let's take up some of those points with Avi. Israel is in control of both parts of the city. It is the dominant military power, and yet Israeli officials in the last few weeks have been talking about their fears of losing control of the city. Why?
Well, we have to remember Jerusalem is surrounded by three parts with major Palestinian communities. To the north we have Ramallah, to the east we have Abu Dis and Azariah, and to the south you have the area of Bethlehem. And unfortunately, as David was saying before, we have witnessed the phenomenon of suicide bombers, Palestinians that were launched from Abu Dis or from Ramallah or from Bethlehem. So we know this is whole a surrounding kind of like hostile environment. And unfortunately, so far we have experienced a bad experience with Palestinians, suicide bombers and other kind of terror attacks that were launched from the surrounding vicinity of Jerusalem. Jerusalem alone suffered more than 650 terror attacks, including 30 suicide bombers inside Jerusalem, resulting in a death toll of more than 200 people. And of course, this is an enormous source for an anxiety among the Israelis, given to that strategic situation.
All right, let's bring Jadis Haq into the picture here. And how do Palestinians see the legacy of the last 40 years of Israeli rule? You have the picture there painted by Avi of one perhaps of a city struggling against Palestinian attacks. How do you see it?
Well, I would like to say first of all that in the 1947 partition plan, Jerusalem was supposed to be under international custody, a corpus separatum, and Israel accepted this. And when they submitted the borders of Israel, they accepted that Jerusalem will not be under Israeli control. And the Israeli annexation of East Jerusalem into Israel is totally null and void according to the international law. So here is Israel trying to do a land grab. The wall has nothing to do with security. It's a land grab. It's a process of de-Palestinizing Jerusalem, reducing its Palestinian population to something like 20%. And what they would like to do is to do very simple, ethnic cleansing to make it only for the Jews. But Jerusalem is more important than only for the Jews. Jerusalem is important for Christians, for Muslims, and for the whole and that's why it was called the city of mankind, the capital of mankind.
Right. I want to pick up on some of those points with David. And can the measures which Israel has introduced be justified on terms of security?
I think if anybody said that the wall was going to be on the green line, nobody would have a real problem. Fact is, I mean, and Israel obviously has a right to defend itself. The problem is that the wall goes into occupied territory, and it is occupied territory. So therefore, and it goes around the settlements. So the settlements are built in occupied territory under international law illegally, and then around the settlements goes a wall, again illegally under international law, and as the International Court of Justice has said. So those two measures, in effect, have encompassed Jerusalem and, in a sense, cut it off from a lot of those people who have enjoyed it and have seen it as the centre of their cultural and spiritual and religious sort of being.
Avi, would you argue with that? I mean, the wall could have taken a different path, and you didn't need to build settlements. Is it really about security or about land grabs?
I will say something that may surprise you. I wish there was no wall at all, but unfortunately we have to remember the background. The wall was set, the fence, the anti-terrorist security fence was set in order to confront the phenomenon of Palestinian suicide bombers. That is the purpose of the wall.
Yeah, but the point which David was raising there was the path that the wall is taken.
The
You
path
didn't need to take
the
more
path
Palestinian
of
land.
the wall in the vicinity of Jerusalem. And by the way, in the vicinity of Jerusalem, unlike other part of the fence, in the vicinity of Jerusalem, major part is a wall in order to avoid taking or grabbing a lot of lands, in order to avoid the best way possible harming the citizen who lives inside the area of Jerusalem. And that's the reason why in large vicinities part of Jerusalem you could find a wall and not a fence, in order to avoid demolishing houses and taking a considerable amount of land. And time and again we have to repeat it. The wall was built in order to deal with the phenomenon of suicide bombers. I wish there was not a wall. I'm very sorry there is a wall. It's very tragic for both Palestinians and Israelis. It's a tragic lunatic reality. But the wall was set not in order to make Palestinians' life miserable, but in order to confront the terrifying phenomenon of suicide bombers. And that is the one absolute thing that must be said in mind.
Right, let's move over to Jad Ishaq. Let's talk about some of the other issues which Palestinians and Palestinian residents of Jerusalem face, such as building permits, family reunification permits. How does that interact with the daily lives of Palestinians?
If you look at the changes in the demography, there are now 60,000 Palestinians who have Jerusalem IDs, who have no dwellings, adequate dwellings in East Jerusalem, because Israel has denied them new neighborhoods, which is while to the settlers this was again made and facilitated so that the settlements grew from almost zero in 1967, that now there are 200,000 settlers in East Jerusalem. But I would like to see where was the Israeli government in granting Palestinians from East Jerusalem new neighborhoods. Just the opposite. We see them strangulating these neighborhoods, forcing them out of the country, they are out of this area. So there is a gradual process, progressive process of de-Palestinizing Jerusalem. This is the ultimate game. To use the pretext of security, I think it's adding insult to injury. And I don't subscribe to this thesis at all, because the whole building of the wall and the whole plan to annex Jerusalem was done even before there were any problems. It was taken immediately following the 1967 war. And all the successive Israeli governments were attempting to increase the boundaries of Jerusalem, to grab more land, but leave the Palestinians or the Palestinian population out of it. So
right, let's, sorry to interrupt, but let's pick up very quickly before we have to go to break. Very briefly, Avi, were it not for the settlement, seems to be the point that Jad is raising here, which started long before suicide bombings. If it wasn't for that problem, perhaps there wouldn't be a security problem?
First of all, I would like to say a few words about what Jad was saying. The reality actually is opposing totally what Jad was saying. In 1967, the number of Arabs inside the Jordanian city of Jerusalem was 68,000 people. Today, the number of the Palestinians inside Jerusalem under the sovereignty of the State of Israel is 240,000 people. The overwhelming majority of the Palestinians in Jerusalem are they bear the legal status of permanent residents in the State of Israel, which allows them with a lot of benefits, including the right to participate in the elections to the municipality, which unfortunately the Palestinians so far have chosen not to practice that right. So the reality must be understood. There were many new housing units added inside the Palestinian communities in Jerusalem. The percentage of the building was increased dramatically, up to 150% in the north part of the city, up to 125% in some of the Palestinian communities inside the city. Okay. So in terms of facts, I think that unfortunately it contradicts totally what Jad was saying.
All right, well, we'll come back and pick up more on the facts, but we do now have to take a break. We have to pause for a short break, but in part two, we'll focus on economic factors which divide Jerusalem's people and ask what the future holds. Stay with us.